When you picture a pharmaceutical quality assurance professional, you probably imagine someone in a pristine white lab coat.
Right, holding a little glass vial up to the light.
Exactly. Looking through a microscope, just totally laser focused on the chemical safety of a life-saving drug.
It's the classic image of scientific rigor. We all really want to believe the people securing our medicine are operating with absolute precision and critical thought.
But then you step into the actual reality of how these pharma companies validate the software that runs their labs in their manufacturing floors.
Yeah, and it's a very different picture.
It really is. Suddenly you realize that high-powered microscope is essentially replaced by a camera, because these highly trained scientific experts are spending their days taking hundreds, maybe even thousands, of literal screenshots of a computer monitor.
Which is just, it's the absolute definition of compliance completely overriding critical thinking. The industry basically created a paperwork nightmare for itself.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're doing this today because you want to stay informed and get to the bottom of complex topics without getting buried in information overload.
Right.
So our mission today is to explore this massive paradigm shift happening right now in one of the most heavily regulated life or death industries on the planet.
We are looking at how the pharmaceutical world is desperately trying to escape that screenshot nightmare, and transition into a framework of smarter, critical thinking-based software testing.
And to really understand how they are fixing this, we are diving into an incredibly insightful article. It's titled CSV to CSA Transition, 5-Step Roadmap.
Yeah, written by Omer Simon.
Right, Omer Simon, the CEO and co-founder of Validfor. It was published fairly recently on January 2, 2026.
And the crazy reality he highlights right out of the gate is that QA professionals in pharma historically spent vastly more time taking screenshots and writing extensive, mind-numbing scripts than they did actually testing the quality of the software.
Which just sounds so backwards.
It is. But before we can explore the roadmap to this solution, we really have to look at the agonizing pain of the status quo.
Right.
We have to understand what they are actually trying to fix, because the old system was just deeply broken on a fundamental level.
Okay, let's unpack this. In the article, Simon talks about traditional CSV, which stands for Computerized System Validation.
Right.
And he describes it as being completely documentation-centric. It causes this phenomenon called test everything fatigue.
Yes, test everything fatigue. That is a very real thing. Under the CSV framework, an organization essentially treats every single software function with identical, overwhelming scrutiny.
And that identical scrutiny is the core of the problem, right?
Yep.
When a QA team sits down to test a new software update, they don't really differentiate based on actual danger.
No, they don't, and it's wild to think about. A software feature that directly calculates a chemical dosage for a patient receives the exact same validation effort as a feature that just, sorts a digital list of employee names alphabetically.
Wow. That is crazy. The goal incorrectly shifted over the years, didn't it?
Yeah.
It became entirely about creating a perfect, spotless document to show to an auditor, rather than actually ensuring a robust, safe software system.
Exactly. It became a box-checking exercise.
It's like, imagine you were thoroughly inspecting a car before taking your family on a massive cross-country road trip.
A completely rational practice. You want to be safe on the highway.
Sure. But under the old CSV mindset, you would spend the exact same amount of time meticulously inspecting the font used on the radio buttons as you would inspecting the actual brake pads.
That is a perfect way to visualize it.
You would photograph the radio buttons from 10 different angles and write a 50-page report confirming they are legible.
Yeah, and you can instantly see how that leads to severe fatigue. The tester is exhausted before they even get to the brake pads.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. In an industry like pharma, where the stakes literally involve human lives, isn't test everything with maximum scrutiny the safest possible approach?
You would think so, right?
Yeah, why wouldn't you want to check the radio buttons just in case? If I'm taking a medication, I kind of want the people who made it to be overly paranoid.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, treating everything as a top priority means that, functionally, nothing is a top priority.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, when your QA team is completely exhausted from writing 50-page scripts and snapping screenshots to test a harmless drop-down menu, They have significantly less cognitive energy and time to test the algorithmic logic that actually calculates a drug dosage.
So prioritizing the radio buttons actively endangers the brake pads.
Exactly. And regulators eventually recognize this danger. The FDA actually released draft guidance encouraging a massive shift to what they call CSA, which is Computer Software Assurance.
Changing validation to assurance, that language shift feels very intentional.
Oh, it absolutely is. The FDA is actively pushing for this paradigm shift. CSA is critical thinking centric rather than documentation centric. The focus shifts entirely away from the question, did I document every single microscopic step of this test? To a much more important question.
Which is?
Does this specific feature impact patient safety or product quality? Testing smarter, not just testing less, is what actually protects patient safety better.
So what does this all mean for the actual business? If we understand why the old CSV mindset is flawed and optimizing for the wrong thing, what is the tangible return on investment?
The ROI is huge.
I mean, it has to be, right? Because changing how a massive pharmaceutical giant operates sounds incredibly expensive and painful. It has to be worthwhile.
The return on investment is actually staggering when you look at the metrics Simon provides in the article. By skipping those heavily scripted, step-by-step documentation tests on low-risk features, companies can cut their overall validation time by up to 50%.
Half the time. Wow. That is a massive reduction in friction when a company is trying to get a new product to market or simply update a critical internal system.
Absolutely. And less time spent on documentation directly results in significantly lower operational costs.
But I have a huge question here. Does cutting validation time in half mean we're just accepting a buggier system? Like, are we just crossing our fingers and hoping those low-risk features work without fully checking them?
Not at all. And what's fascinating here is what teams actually do with all that newly freed up time.
Okay, what do they do?
Because they aren't buried under a mountain of paperwork, they can perform what the industry calls destructive testing.
Destructive testing. That
Yeah.
sounds super intense.
It is highly effective. Instead of following a rigid happy path checklist that just confirms the software does what it's supposed to do under perfect conditions, testers use their critical thinking to actively try to break the system.
How does that actually work in practice? Like day to day?
So think about a standard test under the old rules. The script says, enter the number 5 for the dosage. Confirm the system accepts the number 5. The tester does it, takes a screenshot, and moves on. They prove the system works when used perfectly. Destructive testing throws that script out.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The tester says, what happens if a user accidentally inputs a negative number for a drug dosage? What happens if they type letters instead of numbers? What if someone unplugs the barcode scanner right in the middle of scanning a critical chemical component?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
They act like an unpredictable human being, not just a robot following a script.
Exactly. They push the boundaries. This uncovers real, critical bugs and system deviations that a standard, rigid checklist would completely miss, because the checklist only looks for success.
That makes a ton of sense. You are testing less overall. You are reallocating your testing budget, your time, your money, and your human brain power to the places where it actually matters. The ROI is proven. Better testing, half the time, lower costs. So how does a massive organization practically begin this transition? According to the source, Simon outlines a 5-step roadmap, and surprisingly, it doesn't start with evaluating the software at all. It begins with human psychology.
Right, which is almost always the hardest part of any major transition. Step 1 in the roadmap is conducting a gap analysis and, crucially, a culture shift.
A culture shift.
Yeah, the biggest barrier here is entirely cultural, not technical.
Because these quality assurance teams are deeply fundamentally trained to document everything. I mean, their entire professional mantra is just in case the auditor asks, just in case something goes wrong 5 years from now.
Exactly. Teams have to be actively encouraged by leadership to pause and ask the fundamental question of why before they write a test script.
Right.
If the software function they are testing doesn't touch patient safety or data integrity, no formal, heavy script is needed.
It's basically like decluttering therapy for QA teams who have become professional hoarders of documentation. You have to convince them it is actually okay to throw out the old magazines.
That's a great way to put it.
But honestly, how do you look a veteran QA person in the eye and tell them to stop documenting everything? Their entire career, their whole sense of professional safety has been built around that exact just-in-case paranoia.
It is incredibly difficult. You are asking them to unlearn decades of ingrained defensive behavior. As we touched on earlier, they optimized for surviving the auditor, not for making the software better.
Which is completely understandable from their perspective.
Well, totally. And that is why step 2 is so critical. Redefine your risk assessment. If you take away their safety blanket of heavy documentation, you must replace it with a clear, reliable framework so they feel safe letting go.
So how do they redefine risk under this new CSA model to give them that confidence?
They have to move away from the complex, rigid scoring models of the past. The new assessment separates software functions into incredibly clear, simple categories.
Okay, like what?
Well, high-risk features those with a direct, undeniable impact on patient safety or product quality still require the old-school, rigorous, scripted testing. The safety net stays firmly intact exactly where it belongs.
Okay, so they don't lose the rigor where it counts. But then you have the medium and low-risk features, things with only an indirect impact.
Right.
Simon gives examples like user management interfaces or sorting data in a reporting tool. These become the prime candidates for what he calls unscripted testing.
Yes, and once those mental hurdles are cleared and the risks are firmly categorized, the company has to change its actual day-to-day testing mechanics.
That makes sense.
If the QA team wants to change their behavior, they need permission from the corporate rulebook. This leads right into step 3, updating SOPs.
Standard operating procedures, the holy grail and the ultimate bottleneck of any corporate environment.
You said it. You cannot expect your team to change their behavior if the official corporate rulebook still legally mandates traditional CSV deliverables. The SOPs must be officially rewritten and revised to explicitly allow for things like unscripted and ad hoc testing.
And the article specifically mentions that these updated SOPs should directly reference the FDA's draft guidance on CSA.
That is a crucial detail.
It really feels like the ultimate security blanket the QA team needs. It gives them the confidence to know, hey, we aren't just going rogue here to save time. The FDA is actively telling us to do this.
Having that regulatory backing explicitly written into their own procedures is what makes the culture shift actually stick. Once the rules allow for it, the organization can actually move to step 4, implement unscripted testing.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What does unscripted testing actually look like in practice, day to day?
Simon highlights 2 specific methods.
Okay.
The first is ad hoc testing, which is defined as a natural exploration of the system.
Just kind of poking around.
Exactly. The second is error guessing, where the tester looks in the specific places where bugs usually like to hide, based purely on their own professional experience.
And the beauty of this approach is how drastically the documentation burden changes.
Oh, it's night and day. Instead of writing a 50-step script and taking an endless series of screenshots for every single mouse click to prove they tested a low-risk feature, they might just write a simple pass-fail summary. Or perhaps they just take one single final screenshot at the very end to show the low-risk item functions correctly.
I really love this concept. To use an analogy, the old way scripted testing is like giving someone a boring user manual and saying, read page 4, push button A, confirm the light turns green, document it, read page 5, push button B.
Right, very robotic.
But ad hoc and error guessing is like handing a video game to a mischievous teenager and saying, hey, try to glitch this, see if you can get your character stuck in the wall. You have 20 minutes, go crazy.
That is exactly it.
You are relying on human intuition and natural curiosity to find the flaws, rather than just blindly following a checklist.
And that intuition is the heartbeat of critical thinking. A veteran QA tester knows exactly where a system is likely to break because they have seen similar systems fail a dozen times before.
Yeah, they have a gut feeling about it.
But the old rules wouldn't let them just jump to that weak spot and test it without writing a massive script first. The new rules empower them to use their expertise immediately.
That's awesome.
And that empowerment feeds perfectly into step 5 of the roadmap, which is vendor leverage.
Right, because companies don't build all their software from scratch internally anymore. They use SaaS, software as a service. They buy tools from outside developers.
Exactly. And modern SaaS vendors already do extensive internal testing before they release a new product or a patch update to their customers.
So what does Simmons suggest here?
He argues that pharmaceutical companies need to stop blindly retesting everything from scratch during their own internal change control cycles. Instead, they should review the vendor's own validation package. If the vendor's testing is robust, the pharma company should leverage it to radically reduce their own internal workload.
Wait, I have to challenge this.
Hmm.
Rely on the vendor's homework.
I know how it sounds.
If a software glitch causes a batch of medicine to be ruined, or worse, harms a patient, the FDA is coming after the pharma company. They aren't going to punish the software vendor. How do you convince a highly regulated QA manager to just trust an outside company's testing?
Well, this raises an important question, and it is the exact nightmare scenario that keeps QA managers up at night. But leveraging vendor documentation absolutely does not mean blindly trusting it without review.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It means critically evaluating the vendor's quality management system, their QMS, once upfront.
Oh, I see. So you audit the vendor's practices before you ever buy the software.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
verify their methods. If they prove they have rigorous, highly documented standards, you accept their baseline testing for the low-risk features. You then reserve your precious internal resources strictly for retesting the high-risk, custom configurations that are completely unique to your specific scientific process.
Okay, that makes complete sense.
Yeah.
You aren't trusting them blindly. You are verifying their competence, so you don't have to duplicate their basic labor.
It is all about risk allocation again.
So we have the 5 steps of the roadmap now. Conduct a gap analysis and culture shift, redefine your risk assessment, update your SOPs, implement unscripted testing, and leverage your vendors.
Right.
But as we know, no plan survives contact with reality. What are the inevitable roadblocks when a massive bureaucracy actually tries to roll this out?
Simon points out 2 major organizational challenges. The first is simply overcoming internal resistance, fighting that dangerous corporate phrase, "we've always done it this way."
Ugh, the ultimate killer of all innovation. How do you beat the inertia of we've always done it this way?
His solution is actually highly practical. Run a pilot project. Do not try to change the entire culture of a global company overnight.
Start small.
Exactly. Choose a small, low-risk system update. Apply the new CSA principles, track the metrics meticulously, and demonstrate the massive time savings to the executive leadership. Success and hard data speak for themselves.
Okay, that's smart. And the second challenge he mentions is something we touched on earlier when we talked about the psychology of the QA teams.
Yeah.
Auditor fear.
Oh, yes.
Will the actual inspector with the clipboard, the person who holds the power to shut down your facility, actually accept this new way of doing things?
The solution to auditor fear is rock-solid traceability. You have to clearly and demonstrably link your testing effort directly to the risk level.
How do you do that?
Well, if you can show an auditor a clear report that says, "We tested this function less because our critical thinking risk assessment proved it does not impact patient safety," auditors generally respond very positively to that.
Really? They don't just demand the 50-page report.
No, because it shows you deeply understand the architecture of your system. And again, the FDA itself is championing this shift, so the auditors are actively looking for this kind of critical thinking.
But doing all of this dynamic risk assessment and constantly linking different features to different types of testing methods brings up a terrifying logistical nightmare.
It really does.
Simon explicitly states in the article that you cannot implement CSA with old-school paper-based methods or disconnected Excel spreadsheets.
You absolutely cannot. If you try to manage dynamic, risk-based workflows on a static, manually updated Excel sheet, you will fail your audit spectacularly.
Yeah, I can imagine.
The manual overhead of just keeping that spreadsheet updated would completely destroy all the time you save by not taking screenshots.
So he says the transition requires a modern, AI-enhanced validation lifecycle management platform, a VLM.
Yes.
He mentions these platforms have built-in risk-based workflows, traceability matrices that automatically link the risk to the specific tests, and automated periodic reviews.
Which is how we maintain compliance without falling back into our old, terrible habits of hoarding documentation. A centralized VLM tool enforces the new CSA framework. It acts as the unyielding guardrails for the team.
I understand the workflow aspect, but how does something like a traceability matrix actually work in practice? Kind of sounds like a buzzword.
Think of a traceability matrix as an automated web connecting every part of your software.
Okay.
If a developer at your company changes a single line of code in the user management system, the VLM platform instantly highlights exactly which 3 test scripts need to be rerun to verify that specific change. It traces the risk directly to the test.
Oh, wow.
Right. Under the old system, a human being would have to spend a week manually reviewing a 500-page Excel sheet just to find where the overlaps might be, and they would likely miss something.
That is incredible. But let me push back on the business side of this. Are we just replacing a massive manual paperwork burden with a massive, expensive software subscription burden?
It's a fair point to bring up.
Are we just trading one headache for a much more expensive digital headache?
It is a fair concern, but it completely misses the fundamental value of the platform. The value isn't just is switching your medium from physical paper to digital screens.
Right, it's more than that.
The true value is in that automated traceability we just talked about. The software platform does the administrative heavy lifting, finding the connections, tracking the approvals, logging the timestamps so the human being can do the critical thinking.
Oh, I see.
You are paying for a tool that forces your organization to stay in the efficient, high-quality mindset of CSA rather than slowly slipping back into the bloated CSV documentation trap the moment things get stressful.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the big picture of what we've uncovered today. We've just traced an incredible leap forward in the pharmaceutical industry.
We really have.
They are actively trying to move away from the rigid, screenshot-obsessed, auditor-fearing days of computerized system validation and stepping into the dynamic, critical thinking-driven world of computer software assurance.
It represents a fundamental shift in how we define quality and safety. We are moving from proving we followed instructions to proving we understand the system.
And the core takeaway for you, the listener, whether you work in pharmaceuticals or you are just trying to optimize workflows in your own daily life or streamline your own business, is this.
Stop treating every task with equal weight.
Exactly. Not every feature is a brake pad. Some are just radio buttons. When you stop burning your mental energy trying to perfectly document the low-risk stuff, you suddenly have the freedom to focus your critical thinking, your destructive testing, and your real human intuition on the areas that actually matter.
That is exactly the point. And, I want to leave you with a final thought that builds on everything we've discussed today regarding this massive transition.
What's that?
Well, if the FDA, the governing body of one of the most highly regulated life or death industries on Earth, is actively pushing for unscripted testing and critical thinking over rigid documentation, what does that mean for other bureaucratic industries?
Oh, that's a really great question.
Right. Could this exact same assurance over validation mindset eventually revolutionize how we handle airline safety protocols or complex financial compliance in banking?
Or even the future of AI governance.
Exactly. If the pharma industry is admitting that massive documentation doesn't equal safety, are we about to see the end of the check-the-box era everywhere?
It really makes you wonder, maybe it is time for every industry to finally put down the camera, stop taking screenshots of the monitor, and actually start looking through the microscope again.
I couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.